Exploring the science of climate change, what you need to know. Climate change is one of the most pressing issues facing humanity today. Its effects are far-reaching, with dramatic impacts on our environment, economies, and public health. With the help of science, we can better understand how climate change is happening and how it will affect us. Exploring the science of climate change is essential for making informed decisions about how to manage our resources and reduce our impact on the planet. In this article, we will look at what climate change is and how it works, discuss the current scientific consensus on climate change, and provide an overview of the steps we can take to mitigate and adapt to its effects. From the causes of climate change to how we can reduce our emissions, this article will provide an overview of all the important information you need to know. What is climate change? Climate change refers to a change in the average weather patterns of a region lasting for decades or longer. It can be observed in terms of changes in temperature, humidity, atmospheric CO2 levels, sea ice coverage, and precipitation. There are various causes of climate change, all linked to human activities. The most common source of climate change is the emission of greenhouse gases, GHGs, into the atmosphere, which traps heat and changes the chemical balance of the atmosphere. This leads to a rise in temperatures, which can cause significant changes in global weather patterns. Historically, the Earth's climate has always been in a state of change. However, the speed and magnitude of these changes are now being significantly increased by human activity. The main cause of this is the emission of carbon dioxide, CO2, and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. The Earth's natural systems, such as forests and oceans, absorb a large amount of CO2. As humans continue to emit CO2 and other GHGs, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere increases and so does the Earth's temperature. This leads to climate change, which can cause dramatic changes in global weather patterns. Causes of climate change. There are various causes of climate change, all linked to human activities. The most common source of climate change is the emission of greenhouse gases, GHGs, into the atmosphere, which traps heat and changes the chemical balance of the atmosphere. This leads to a rise in temperatures, which can cause significant changes in global weather patterns. CO2 is the most commonly discussed GHG, but there are many others, including methane, nitrous oxide, and HFC gases. Some of these are produced naturally, but many are also produced by human activities. Here are some of the most common sources of GHGs. The burning of fossil fuels. Burning fossil fuels, such as coal and petroleum, releases CO2 into the atmosphere. This is the single biggest cause of climate change. Improvements in technology, such as the development of renewable energy and electric vehicles, are helping reduce CO2 emissions. However, these must be introduced on a global scale to make a real difference. Effects of climate change. The effects of climate change are many and varied. Some of these are already being experienced, while others are yet to be seen. Here are some examples of the effects of climate change. Sea level rise. Sea levels are rising, driven by the fact that warmer water takes up more space. This puts coastal infrastructure and low-lying areas at risk of flooding, and it looks set to increase the future risk of flooding in cities like London and New York. Increased temperatures. In addition to rising sea levels, scientists are expecting temperatures to rise significantly. This is expected to cause droughts, floods, and extreme weather conditions. Destructive storms. Storms are expected to become more destructive as the planet warms. Tropical storms, hurricanes, and cyclones are all associated with climate change and are expected to become more frequent. The current scientific consensus on climate change. Although the effects of climate change are already being felt, the scientific community is still discussing the exact level of risk. However, the current scientific consensus is that climate change is happening and that humans are the main cause of it. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, a group of scientists that assesses the current state of climate research, has concluded that climate change is occurring and that it is caused by human activity. Since the first IPCC report in 1990, the panel has concluded each decade that the Earth's climate is getting warmer and that this is most likely down to human activities. The IPCC's most recent report was published in 2018, and it concluded that climate change is real and that there is still time to act and reduce emissions. What can be done to mitigate climate change? The only way to stop climate change is to reduce GHG emissions and remove CO2 from the atmosphere. There are various strategies for doing this, including reducing emissions and increasing carbon sequestration. Reducing emissions: many governments are introducing new laws to reduce CO2 emissions and encourage the use of renewable energy. This can be done by increasing taxes on fossil fuels, introducing renewable energy quotas, or introducing laws to improve energy efficiency. Increasing carbon sequestration: another way to reduce CO2 emissions is to increase carbon sequestration. This can be done through reforestation, better soil management, and the use of artificial carbon sinks. What are the strategies for adapting to climate change? As well as reducing CO2 emissions, it is also crucial to adapt to the effects of climate change that are already being felt. Many countries are taking steps to protect their people and infrastructure from the effects of extreme weather, rising sea levels, and other climate change related hazards. Here are some of the most common strategies for adapting to climate change. Building infrastructure that is more resilient to extreme weather. Building infrastructure that is more resilient to extreme weather is one way to adapt to climate change. This can be done by improving drainage systems, building sea walls, and improving flood defenses. Improving public health and emergency response systems. Public health systems are being improved to respond to the increased prevalence of diseases associated with climate change. This can be done by building more hospitals in flood-prone areas, improving disease surveillance systems, and increasing the availability of vaccines. How individuals can reduce their impact on climate change. Individuals can reduce their impact on climate change in a number of ways. Here are some of the most important ways to reduce your impact on global warming. Switching to renewable energy. One of the best ways to reduce your carbon footprint is to switch to renewable energy sources like solar and wind. Eating less meat. Eating less meat has many benefits, including reducing your carbon footprint. Livestock production is responsible for a large amount of CO2 emissions, so reducing your meat intake will have a real impact on your carbon footprint. Recycling. Recycling is one of the easiest ways to reduce your carbon footprint. It is important to remember that not all materials can be recycled, so always check the label to make sure they can. How businesses can reduce their emissions. As well as reducing their own carbon footprints, businesses can also help to mitigate climate change. Here are some of the most common ways that businesses can reduce their carbon emissions. Switching to renewable energy. Businesses can switch to renewable energy sources and improve their carbon footprints. This can be achieved by installing solar panels or wind turbines on company buildings. Improving energy efficiency. Improving energy efficiency can help to reduce a company's carbon emissions. This can be done by installing new energy efficient appliances and improving energy management systems. The role of governments in reducing emissions. As individuals and businesses continue to reduce their emissions, it is important that governments do the same. In fact, governments are the most important actors in reducing emissions and taking the necessary steps to mitigate climate change. There are many ways that governments can reduce their emissions and adapt to climate change. They can choose to invest in renewable energy and carbon capture technology, invest in carbon pricing schemes, invest in carbon sinks, or invest in research into climate change. Conclusion. Climate change is a pressing issue that has drastic implications for our health and our environment. There are various causes of climate change, all linked to human activities. The most common source of GHGs is the burning of fossil fuels, which releases CO2 into the atmosphere. This leads to a rise in temperatures and causes significant changes in global weather patterns. The effects of climate change are many and varied. The only way to stop climate change is to reduce CO2 emissions and remove CO2 from the atmosphere. There